Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Radiorama, where I show you or suggest how you work on radios, televisions, and other forms of obsolete electronic devices that used to fill the average American home back from the 1920s through about the 1960s. And today I have an unknown model airline largish tabletop set. I say unknown because this came in I guess about a week ago. There was a kind person, I guess, whose parents had both been in the antique business, and they would get these radios and they'd refinish them. But subsequently, they removed all the model information. Now, for those of you that... Oh, wait, there we go. Apparently, I wasn't looking in the right place. That is the information right there. It's well, I know exactly who made it. You see it says WGNC Series 8A55. Well, for those of you who are on the other side of the ocean or don't live in the U.S., Montgomery Wards, or as we call them, Wards, or later Monkey Wards, was a large department store chain. And they and Sears and all of the other department stores had their own brands. Sears and Roebuck was Silvertone, and Montgomery Wards was Airline. And so this was made by Wells Gardner. If I were to take a gander, I'd say this is probably a pre-World War II set. In fact, I'm looking at this and I thought maybe it's just a part number, but it looks like one of those generic like grocery store sticker things. I used to use these when I was in retail. You had a big gun and you'd squeeze it and a whole shit ton of little stamps would come out of it, and you'd like, whatever, label the fruit. That's what that looks like. Now it says Riders 13-73. So I'm guessing that must mean, like, if you were to look up this chassis in one of the Riders manuals, that's probably where it was. It kind of doesn't work very well, and this is the second one of the sets I've worked on that came from this donation. What I've found is, even though they did a wonderful job in the cabinets, they didn't do anything to the chassis, and we've got all of the insulation coming off of the wiring going to the eye tube. So there's some real juice on that, and I could potentially damage the set if I powered it up. It looks like the speaker just easily disconnects from the back here. And what do we have here? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tubes. And I was looking at this earlier. We have, actually, it must be a pretty decent sounding set. This is push-pull 6K6 output tubes, which is the kind of like the precursor to the 6V6, so just a little bit less power, but they're related. You could stick a 6V6 in here, no problem. 6F6, 6K6, 6V6, they're all familially identical. We have a 5Y3 rectifier. And it looks like we have 2 or 3 gang tuning condenser, which makes sense. This probably is also a set that can pick up shortwave. Speaker looks like it's an acceptably decent size. Let's see if we've got any rubbing going on. Nope, the cone goes back and forth, not making any scratching noises. That's what I like to hear. Anyway, this is the first set I've worked on since coming back from the Alameda Antiques Fair. After I do one of these shows, I kind of have a little bit of a depressing period where I realize 4 or 5 months worth of solid nightly work and making these videos results in all of them getting sold. So we came back from that show and, like, I don't know what it is. It seems like these radios are very popular with people, and we just about sold out, and now I have to restore another 75 to 80 sets. Combined, we all have to come up with that number. And so they're piling in here, and so expect to see plenty of more sets in the future. Anyway, let's get this guy apart and see what's going on under the hood. I got a sneaking suspicion either it's been repaired once and that's it, and probably nothing else has been replaced. It's probably mostly original. All right, well, the story under here is kind of a mixed bag. I'm guessing this was done quite a ways ago. These electrolytics look pretty old. These could be 60s or 70s era electrolytics, so the recap job is already old enough to need to be redone again, except for these orange drops. These are the newer caps. Those are totally fine. You can leave those alone. But on the other hand, we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 old paper caps. And those are no good. Those should all be replaced. But God, this is what I love about Wells Gardner chassis. You look at them, you're like, how did they get this to work? There's like nothing in here. It's like this huge ass box with like a handful of parts in there. Well, it's more than a handful of parts, but the bigger challenge is going to be dealing with this guy. I wouldn't be surprised if this is in 1941, because it seems like prior to, right before World War II, as in like between like 38 to 41, early 42, whenever I get American electronics from that time period, it seems that the rubber or whatever insulation they were using on their more flexible wiring just fails. Completely just disintegrates. So clearly they hadn't figured out the chemistry yet. Post World War II, most of the time the wiring's still totally fine. Maybe it's stiffened up a little bit, but at least the insulation hasn't failed. So we have probably, let's see, one, it's hard to tell, it's so fractured up. 1, 2, 3, well, it makes sense, it's a 5-pin tube. So we have 5 wires that need to be replaced. And the way you do it is you can lift up on these tabs here, and that can take the socket back. But to be honest, I'm going to have to do this first, because I can't do any testing of the set unless this is repaired. I can't risk having bare naked wires squeezing up against each other. And to tell you the truth, I'm not looking forward to this at all, and I'd just rather get it over with. But first, before I do anything, I'm going to take the set out and give her a dusting job, maybe clean it up a little bit so it'll be just a little bit less nasty to work on. I personally don't like working on gross, dirty radio chassis, but on the other hand, I'm a little OCD, so whatever. Alright, so I've pulled the back of the socket off, and we have all of our wires coming out. And I realized I was looking through my wire collection. I don't have enough different colors of the right gauge to have all 5 different colors. So I'm going to start with these 3 that I've twisted together. And of course I've cut the wire way longer than it needs to be. That's fine. Once I soldered that in there, stuff it down the hole and cut the excess off. Probably a waste of wire, but whatever. So we're going to start with the first 3. We got 1, 2. Well, actually, that's got the resistor on it. That's not connected to anything. 1, 2, and 3. And then we will run those through the hole, and then we'll get our last 2 wires and hook it up underneath the chassis. Alright, I have to make a stupid confession, which is I started pulling these wires out of there. Like, do, and usually you're supposed to place them one at a time so you can, connect one end and the other. So I just took all the wires out and realized, well, now I'm going to look at the schematic and look at the tube pin out to make sure I'm getting the wires in the right place. So I pulled up my vintage RCA tube manual and looked up the pins on the tube. Big pin tubes, meaning they don't have a keyway, they got fat pins. What you want to do is you get your 2 fat pins at the bottom. Your clockwise left fat pin is pin number 1. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The schematic is on my phone, but anyway, I've compared this to what the schematic said, and I connected right wires with right wires. And luckily, it appears that I did it right. Now, I don't have an antenna connected, but the filament's correct. We've got a good solid phosphor there. Now, granted, my controls are filthy. But it seems to be working. Sorry, I'm coughing. So I'm pretty pleased about that. I didn't totally fuck things up. The setting seems to be working just a little bit. I'm still going to replace those electrolytics and the paper caps, and I definitely need to clean the controls because it's just barely functioning. Sorry, I'm farting in the background. Had beanie weenies for dinner last night. All right, so we got the cabinet flipped back over again, and we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Still debating about these electrolytics. I'll probably replace them anyway. So we have 7 capacitors that need to be replaced. We have a bunch of really dirty contacts on this thing. We need to clean the terminal. Well, we need to clean the band switch and the volume pot. There's probably a tone control in this somewhere. Yeah, it's up here. Clean all these guys up so that we don't have the interference and static that we're getting when we're trying to switch between the bands. Now, the way you read these old paper caps is they almost always have their values written on the sides. This says 0.001 microfarad. Sometimes it's too hard to see, you can scrape the wax off. The voltage, I get everything at 630 volts DC. This says 200 volts. I'm going to replace it with a 630. I just order everything in that voltage automatically. This is 0.0005 microfarads at 400 volts. This one is, sometimes you have to twist them around to see the values. This one is a it's hard to see. Well, I'll find it out. It's either a 0.0047 or a 0.047. I can't really tell without scratching at it. We've got another one over here. And we have a 40 microfarad and a 20 microfarad cap rated at 450 volts. About right. We have a transformer set. Here's the transformer. Puts out higher voltage than a conventional hot chassis set where one end of the line is going through all the tube filaments. This, on the other hand, we have a separate 6 volt filament component to the transformer. Puts out 6 volts AC, and that gets distributed here and through all these little red wires that go to all the other tubes to give them their 6 volt filaments. Anyway, let's do some recapping here. We'll start with the electrolytics, and then I'll work my way down to the paper caps. All right, welcome back to day number 2 of working on the Montgomery Wards. And just today, so far, I've installed these 2 new electrolytic capacitors. And the other thing I did was I installed an audio input because I already had phono input. It had an RCA jack here, so I just ran a line through it, 3.5 millimeter jack. And I run out of my little resistor, so I had to do some digging. I have 2 100 ohm resistors, and the right and left channel goes to either end of these 2 resistors, and they tie together onto the positive. And then I put a little glue behind the knot that I tie on the line so it won't chafe on anything or pull loose. So now what's left to do is replace the rest of these paper caps that I pointed out last night, and then we'll do some cleaning of the volume pot and the switch, or the band switch. I'm also going to install a fuse and a fuse holder in between the line going into the set. And what that'll do is that'll protect anything catastrophic from happening. So like, for example, if this transformer decides to go haywire, instead of self-destructing, it'll blow the fuse first, and that'll alert the owner. Time to take it somewhere and have someone take a look at it instead of causing a lot of damage. Well, I have to admit, I have to make a little bit of a pit stop here. I was just basically cleaning this metal because it had a little bit of cadmium corrosion, and I figured if I'm going to drill a hole for the fuse holder, that it was going to kick some of that up a little bit, so I wanted to clean that off, not get it airborne. And as I did so, I wound up shattering the insulation off of one of the wires that was going to something pretty critical. That was going to directly to B+ off the speaker for the field coil. And I looked down, and like, there's this switch wire, this red guy going to the switch. That's 120 raw AC volts on there coming directly from the line. Now ordinarily I would just say heck with it, because it's insulation's intact, but it seems to be tortuously wrapping around a lot of things, and it's also really long. And I don't like how it's suspended in the air a lot. So I'm going to replace that. I'm going to just use a length of lamp cord and replace that whole thing right there. There's probably a few more wires I might replace as well. I just need to see how critical they are. Like if they're suspended in the air and insulation's not so bad, like this is still somewhat flexible, that's fine. Or if it's a really short length and it's not doing anything critical, like it has a lot of high voltage on it, like this, that's fine. But something like this, I just don't feel comfortable. I'm going to replace it. Alright, so here we are. We've got all the caps replaced, and I replaced a few more wires that were kind of troubling looking. And you can see here's the old wire that I pulled out of there. And like you can just look at it and just like crumbles to bits. So no bueno. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is clean the contacts with a little contact cleaner. Here's the volume pot. It has a wiper down in this gap here. You just want to saturate that with cleaner. Then work your volume back and forth. Get it all worked in the pot. I'm going to put one of the knobs on the shaft here so that I can work the band switch back and forth. We'll spray that with a little cleaner. And work that back and forth. Make sure to clean all your contacts up real well. And up here, probably going to be another pot that we need to clean. And it's up here, and it looks like it's got its legs sticking out the top as well. And we'll work that back and forth. So now it's time to give this thing a test and see if it's working better. Alright, we've powered it up and it seems to be working, but we've got an issue. First of all, I have no antenna, so I have no sensitivity. Let me turn this down. So what that is, let me just turn it off because that's annoying. What that is that there's dirt that's accumulated inside of the tuning condenser here. And you see some of these are a little bit bent. Probably, we always call these tin whiskers. Sometimes you get little shavings of metal, and they can basically rub against each other once they get inside these fins, and that can, you know, they kind of mesh together. So that can cause that awful crunching noise like that. Usually it's pretty easy to fix. First thing I'll do is I'll go in with, see if I can find my toothbrush in here. Well, we need a brush, and I don't have the right size. Let me grab that real quick. Luckily my wife has plenty of nice brushes. And first you go in and brush them out like this. And then we're going to go with a business card and then some cleaner and blow it out. Alright, so I've got it working pretty well now. Let me see if I can do this one-handed. Tuning eyes is pretty responsive here. See, just me touching the chassis changes its pattern. It's a good bright green eye tube. These guys usually most of these guys are bad by now. They did not have a very long life expectancy. So someone clearly got a new old stock one back in the day. But this is working really well now. We don't have any of that nasty. Well, there's just a little bit. Got most of it out. I might need to run the business card through this one more time. I usually use these little slivers, and that way I can get down to these little nooks and crannies. But it seems to be working pretty well.
65 plus
pretty sensitive even without an antenna on, so that's pretty good. Once I get this antenna on, that ought to pick up pretty easily. I think what I'm going to do now is oil these bearings, and you do that with a little bit of 3-in-1 oil or whatever, no light machine oil you have to have sitting around the house. Honestly, I just put motor oil in it. Just anything to make it move it smoother. And we'll get all of our little pivots here. Even do the volume and tone control shafts. Just work it all in. Makes everything move so much nice and easy. Well, I need to unplug this thing before I yank it back on again. And the last thing I do is I put a little bit of oil on my finger, like so. And then we'll just run it over the track that the indicator goes. Just, you don't want to get it too oily. Also want to oil these little pulleys here. Doesn't take much. Just a little splash here and there. Smooth as can be. Yes, that works quite well. So I think the last thing that is really up to do, because the cabinet's already done, is I'm going to clean the interior out. It's just nice to start afresh, and we'll put this back in. We'll do a final test, and hopefully it'll be good to go. I lied. The last thing I need to do is install the fuse and the fuse holder that I forgot about. And we're going to mount it right here. And one end of this line is going to go to one end, and the other end will go to where that previously goes. That'll ensure incoming AC. If you think anything that happens immediately in the chain of command, like that transformer that goes haywire, it's going to blow this fuse. I use a 1.5 slow blow fuse, and they look about like this. It's important because when you turn a tube radio on, you're going to have a pretty tremendous surge initially as the heaters in all the tubes rush to heat themselves up, so they're going to pull quite a bit more current initially, and slow blow fuse will not blow instantaneously, as the name would say. Instant blowing fuse, or fast blow fuse, you might blow that just for waiting for the tubes to warm up, so it's important. Alright, so we got the aforementioned fuse and fuse holder installed, and so now I think we're ready for final assembly. Alright, it is done and back together again. I did spend a little time on this dial glass because I know from experience these guys look pretty awesome. They were pretty smart putting these prisms of plastic so that the lights can kind of carry that through. It's not my favorite dial, but it's one of my favorite lighting effects. Anyway, we got the phono hooked up to my Bluetooth connector here. And likewise, radio's working really well.
To Ukraine, but a preview of upcoming USF games. The blank information. And now your host. Ticket Smarter is proud to be.
I do have the eye tube in a little bit crooked. I need to twist it a little bit this way, but that's fine. I can do it easily.
For Russia to employ.
A vote on Russian oil ban.
She tried to take me upstairs for a ride.
Pretty good sounding radio, really.
Off her shoulder.
All right. Anyway, that concludes this rather chaotic episode of Radiorama. And we had kind of a raggedy, sort of slightly sickly radio that came in. Just needed a little bit of a tune-up. So she's good to be back on the road, hopefully, for another 70 or 80 years. Anyhow, thanks so much for watching. If you have any comments or questions, you can always leave those down in the comments section below. If you like this channel, make sure and press that like button. And until the next time something obsolete like this comes across my workbench, I'll see you guys next time. Adios.